Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome back to Headbanger's Closet. So for this video, I'm going to show all my favorite records that came out in the year I got into heavy metal. And I kind of want to start like a trend or a thread or challenge, whatever you will, for the VC. I don't really know the correct terminology for it, but anyway, I want you guys to show me all of your favorite records from your collection that came out in the year you got into heavy metal. Now, I'm sure, I'm kind of new to the VC, so I'm sure this challenge has been done before. But it'd be still cool to get in on it, maybe start another wave of it. It'd be cool to watch, all y'all's videos and see what your favorite records in your collection are from that year you got into heavy metal. So for me, technically, the year is 1983. I shouldn't fail to mention that 1984, which I've mentioned on this channel a lot before, was like the big year, in my opinion, for heavy metal. So many classic albums came out in that year. That was the year that really kind of put the stamp on me as a kid. 1983, I was, I think, 7, turning 8 years old. But 1984, the year later, was really put the stamp on me as a heavy metal fan. But 83 technically is where it got its start. There was a lot of albums from that year that I picked up that year. I was able to check out videos on MTV, which I'll get to in a minute. But these are in no particular order except for the first one and the last one. So the first one is Motley Crue's Shout at the Devil. Came out 83, as did all of these records. This is my OG copy right here. And this band came out, 80, 81, put out Too Fast for Love. 81 wasn't until 83 where they put out their second album, Shout at the Devil, and I heard it on the playground at my Catholic school. I went to a K through 8th grade Catholic school in North Attleboro, Massachusetts, called St. Mary's Sacred Heart, and I was in, I think, the 2nd grade, and one of the kids, the older kids, had the cassette tape playing this song in the playground before school, and it was like nothing I've ever heard before. I thought it was absolutely phenomenal. I was listening to a lot of records and tapes, bands and artists that my mom liked growing up, but this was the first album or first I've ever heard of heavy metal. I think I'd maybe heard Judas Priest and Black Sabbath at my uncle's house, but I didn't know that was heavy metal. So this was the first thing that I knew was a heavy metal album, and I loved it. The music was phenomenal. Looking at the artwork in the inner sleeve on the kid's cassette tape, I thought the pentagram looked super cool, with the way the guys looked. It was just that look to me that, it was like I was not supposed to be listening to this or looking at it because I was in Catholic school, and it was like, kind of taboo subject, when I was a kid, and I liked that. I kind of liked the way it made me feel. I liked the fact that it was the pentagram and Shout at the Devil kind of played to my rebellious side that I didn't know I had, at that young age. So I absolutely loved it. I got the cassette tape for Christmas that year, and then my birthday, I was able to get the album. So this one right here. So Motley Crue is where it all started. I still find it hilarious that I discovered heavy metal in Motley Crue at Catholic school. So the next one, and kind of before I get to the next one, I didn't have cable TV in my town at that time. So luckily for me, when I was in kindergarten through, I think, 4th grade, after school, a friend of mine and I went to one of my mother's friend's house, and she watched us just in the next town over until my mom got off work and brought us home. And they had cable TV in that town, so I was able to watch the MTV and the videos for Looks That Kill and Too Young to Fall in Love. And also the video for this album, the title track, which was You Can't Stop Rock and Roll, which is a really cool, funny video from Twisted Sister. And absolutely great album, early 80s traditional heavy metal, before they kind of went really glam. I know the album right here is picture them, but this is kind of like the next record, in my opinion, Stay Hungry, which came out 84. This is kind of, to me, what Twisted Sister looked like from that video, You Can't Stop Rock and Roll. But just great, New York City style, traditional American heavy metal. Awesome songs like I Am, I'm Me, The Kids Are Back are also on this record. Phenomenal album. And kind of before I go any further, I've got a lot of this stuff. Some of the bands, some of the heavier stuff, I didn't get into until a little bit later in the 80s. I watched MTV, wasn't allowed to stay up and watch Headbangers Ball. So some of the more thrash stuff I didn't get into a little bit later, but nonetheless, they're my favorite albums that came out in this year. And one of those bands is another traditional heavy metal band called Warlord. Didn't really hear these guys till much, much later in my life, but was able to pick this reissue up from High Roller Records, who always do such a great job of putting out multiple variants of early to mid 80s metal albums that might be harder to find, but I think the better way to describe it is albums that might be more pricey these days, so you can pick up a reissue a little bit cheaper than the OG, and that's what I did here for Warlord. Check these guys out if you hadn't heard them. Really, really great stuff. Great guitars. Just, like I said, early 80s traditional heavy metal. Speaking of early 80s traditional heavy metal, we have the Kings here, in my opinion. Iron Maiden, part of that new wave of British heavy metal movement, in my opinion. But this is 1983's Peace of Mind. Just like Shout at the Devil, this is a classic album in heavy metal history. And kind of this isn't my OG, and you can see how beat up it is. So one kind of interesting thing about this album, I actually picked this particular record up at Ann and Hope record section in Central Falls, Rhode Island, back in, I think I picked this up in like 83, 84, or 84, 85, to be honest with you, but I picked this album up before I even heard Iron Maiden. I just thought the album cover was that freaking cool that I wanted to have this in my collection. I actually put it on the wall above my bureau before I even listened to it. So I just picked that up on artwork alone, and I did a video a while back on like album artwork. So that was involved. That album was in that video. If you want to check it out. Next record is Savatage Sirens. This is a reissue with the new, kind of newer album cover. Really would like to get an OG with that OG cover, but Savatage isn't really one of my favorite bands. So I don't go looking for that particular record online to buy, but if I was able to see it in the wild, I'll definitely check it out. And this is a reissue that came out a few years ago, maybe like 3 or 4 years ago, and is on translucent blue. Pretty cool looking. I dig Savatage. My favorite record from them would be this one or Hall of the Mountain King. I'm not a huge fan of the stuff that came later after Hall of the Mountain King, but I know that a lot of people think that albums like Gutter Ballet are one of the greatest, traditional heavy metal albums. I'm just not a big fan of it. But next one we've got is Ozzy's Bark at the Moon, just like Shout at the Devil, just like Peace of Mind, another classic in heavy metal history. This is no different. Another one of my OG copies I picked up back then. I was a huge Ozzy fan as a kid. I thought, with the whole biting the head off a bat story, I just thought he was like the coolest dude around. Didn't really know about his massive substance abuse problems. But, back then as a young, impressionable kid, we're talking about 9, 10, 11 years old, I thought he was amazing. And this was my OG copy, lucky for me. Due to the condition it's in, I've got multiple reissues, but check it out here. So there's the inner sleeve, and then, yeah, it's completely split and ripped, but I kind of wanted to show this one. Absolutely love Ozzy. Like I said, been a fan my whole life, but his solo career was big for me, and I didn't really know till a little bit later on in life that he was the singer for Black Sabbath back then. So next one we've got is Slayer's debut, Show No Mercy. This is one of my reissues that came out a few years ago when Metal Blade put out all of the Slayer stuff. It's on black and red splatter. Really, really cool. Love this record. I think it doesn't get enough attention. I think this is easily most people's like 5th or 6th favorite Slayer record. For me, it's probably like in the top 3 to 4. I think it's a great record. Their debut, so many awesome songs on this, and I really like how you can hear Kerry King's Judas Priest worship on this record. So, didn't get into the heavier stuff till a little bit later in the 80s, but there's some of my favorite albums that came out in 1983. But what I was really listening to in the early 80s was a lot of the hair bands, a lot of traditional heavy metal bands, pretty much stuff that they played on MTV, and Def Leppard was a big one. Pyromania is one of my favorite Def Leppard albums. The video for Photograph was just huge growing up. Loved the song. Pretty much every song on this album is phenomenal, though. I don't think this album gets talked about enough when it comes to early, influential heavy metal records. These guys are new wave of traditional heavy metal, new wave of British heavy metal royalty. Absolutely great stuff. They kind of lost me a little bit later in the 80s, early 90s when they got a little bit more poppy, a little bit more commercial. But some of those early Def Leppard records, like that first 3 or 4, phenomenal stuff. Just great. Those are the stuff I go back to time and time again, where I just leave the later stuff alone. Next one we got is Quiet Riot's Mental Health, another massive album from that year, 83, massive album from the 80s. MTV played the hell out of this stuff. This is another of my OG copy that I got from Ann and Hope. But MTV played the hell out of Come On Feel the Noise and Mental Health videos, which I always thought were really cool videos, especially with the kid in his bedroom cranking the stereo. The mask falls on him and he can't get it off, and then he becomes this dude right here. So awesome stuff. Really loved that stuff as a kid. It really, there was something about metal that just kind of like drew me in, and a lot of the imagery for bands like Quiet Riot and Motley Crue and other hair bands just really played up to that for me. Next one we got is Mercyful Fate's Melissa, just classic heavy metal album. Another Metal Blade reissue on orange, red, and yellow flame, kind of like splatter, if you will. Awesome stuff. Great, great album. If you don't know this record, which I'm sure if you're watching this channel, everybody does, but awesome, awesome stuff. Really excited to hear their new album they come out. I know they just named Becky Baldwin the permanent bass player, and she was touring bass player for their last American tour, which I was fortunate enough to go see them in Atlanta. And next album we got is Exciter's Heavy Metal Maniac. Yeah, great Canadian three-piece thrash metal band with the drummer as the lead singer. This is a reissue I picked up a few years ago on mint green black splatter, and it is on Megaforce Records. I think it is a bootleg reissue. I could be wrong, but I picked this up at a record store in Atlanta, not Metal Blades Records, so I kind of want to say this is a bootleg. Anyway, awesome album. The whole thing's great. That early 80s thrash metal sound, that kind of like underproduced sound that I like so much. So I'll be doing a video of my favorite underrated 80s thrash bands, and Exciter will probably be included in that because I just think these guys don't get enough love. Just awesome, awesome stuff. And they're still on tour. They're still going. They've got young DK, Daniel DK, as their permanent guitar player now, and they're doing a U.S. or North American tour at the moment. Hopefully they come to Atlanta because I missed them last time they came. So I said these albums weren't in any particular order except for the first and the last. Well, this is the last record I'm going to show in the video, and I feel it's the best album that came out in 1983. It is Metallica's debut, Kill 'Em All. This is my OG pressing on Megaforce Records with the original inner sleeve. Really stoked to have this in the collection. But I think this is an absolute game changer. Slayer was around at the time Metallica was, doing their thing. But as great as Slayer was, and I'm not taking anything away, but Metallica is the game changer in my opinion. Nothing sounded like these guys when they came out, and absolutely love this record. Love everything about the way it sounds. I love everything that came after it. I love the fact that it kind of changed heavy metal, and we got a lot of bands that kind of took after them and became thrash bands. That Bay Area thrash scene, there was so many great thrash bands that kind of came out after Metallica, that Metallica was hanging out with all through the early and mid 80s. So that's my favorite record that came out in 1983. Those are my favorite records that came out in 1983. Really looking forward to seeing what you guys have in your collections from the year that you guys got into heavy metal. So be sure to tag me in the video so I can check it out. And I appreciate everybody checking out the channel. Appreciate everybody watching. And I'll have another video for you guys very soon. Cheers, everybody.